So what we were studying last time, Friday, I think we left off with, was the question, what are the parameters of being able to save yourself by stealing, right? So, good morning. So the tshuva that he gives is as follows. Mishu nimtza b'matzav pikuach nefesh, asur ligzol al menat lahatzil atzmo, ela mutar lo litol al menas l'shalim. He says you're not allowed to steal, but you're allowed to take with the intention of paying, which is a form of stealing. So the language is not really that great. But what he's basically saying that yes, you can save your life if it means stealing from someone, but you have to be willing to pay back. V'yesh misha omer shafilu hu ani ata v'yodea she'en lo l'shalem imrotza l'shalem l'chashatimtza yado mutar. Some say that even if you don't have the means to pay it back now, when you're saving your life, as long as your intention is to eventually, when you get the means to pay back, you will, then that would also be okay. However, when there's no sakanas nefashos, when there's no danger to your life, then even if your intention is to pay, you're not allowed to steal. And that's something that we had learned before, right? In other words, you can't steal with the intention to pay because that's a form of thievery. Let me just see. Yeah, and the Torah adds, "Devadai ein lecha davar ha'omed bifnei pikuach nefesh." There's nothing that stands in the way of pikuach nefesh. If I'm allowed to eat treif, I'm allowed to steal. Lekachu rashai litlo ulahatzel nafsho, avalo yikachenu al das l'shalim. But therefore you're allowed to take it, but your intention has to be to pay. Okay, so let us go on. Ligzol me akum shema'akev hashavas hatashlum. Okay, so the question here is, can I steal from a non-Jew who owes me payment and hasn't paid? In other words, do two wrongs make a right? She'ela. So here's the following shaila. Chenvani shemachar la'akum bahakafa. All right, so there's a vendor, a retailer. He sells merchandise to a non-Jew on credit. The kavazman hatashlum biyom zevazeh. And he says, okay, you owe me for the items that you've purchased. The payment date is due on June 1st. Velo paralo bisman. So June 1st arrived, and the guy hasn't paid. Ha'im mutar lechenveni lahosif b'pinkaso al cheshman ha'akum mibeli sheyargish bekach she'ilu yada lo hayamochelo b'mechir zeh. Is it permissible for the merchant to add a service fee, an added amount onto his bill without his even realizing it, without the non-Jew realizing it, with the understanding that had the guy known that this would be added on, he never would have bought the item. So is that a form of stealing, to add a service fee without notifying him?
What about if it just increased the pricing without even telling them and let them know, say, hey, it just gone up and you don't increase it for everybody else? Is there a difference?
Yeah, this is what you're doing. You're increasing the price of the item on the new invoice without even telling him. And so that's
taking it a step further. If you tell him that you're because the price has gone up, but you only increase it for him.
Yeah. Well, listen, there's no law that says that when you sell a piece of merchandise, you have to sell it at the same price to all your customers, right? They're even like I remember I told you, and I worked in the restaurant supply industry. They used to have 5 different prices, that the sales reps would go around, and the sales reps don't. I mean, do you have this in your industry too?
Yeah.
Where the sales reps have if it's up to them to decide what price to give to the customer, If they think they can get more and he's a small customer, then they'll just get a higher commission. Yeah,
That's correct. They can get away with it.
yeah. So there's nothing wrong with it.
Volume discounting.
There's volume
That's also-
discounting,
So
right?
that's even the question. If you can get away with it, you can get away with it.
Yeah.
To make up for a previous theft, is that?
Right. Well,
I felt like you're trying to be sneaky and adding. like-
so you are being sneaky because the original price was X, and now you're tacking on and you're saying that each widget is worth X plus one. And why you're doing it first of all without notifying him that you've added fees onto his original purchase, and you're doing it because he hasn't paid on time. So it's almost like you're giving him you're imposing a penalty, but the way you're structuring the penalty is you're making it part of the purchase price, and you're not informing him.
And this is
So-
a non-Jew.
This is a non-Jew.
So like a caveat emptor aspect for the non-Jew that doesn't.
Right. Well, the question is, am I allowed to do
No,
this?
I suspect.
Am I allowed to do this? Is there any deception? Is this kind of deceptive practice permissible because he's not paying me on time? So can I take my revenge on him by tacking on a fee that was not originally built
Revenge or
in?
just recovery?
No, it's not so much recovery because
He didn't pay you.
he hasn't paid me. How am I going to? Is it more of a recovery if I add on to the price?
Yeah, because
That's-
you're making up money that you've lost.
Am I making money up that I lost?
He hasn't paid you, you're trying to make it up in future sales.
I didn't understand that was the case. No, he's saying
No,
he,
so can you?
No.
Maybe I
he still owes you the money, but you're adding on to his bill.
Right, but by adding on to the bill, you're now making up for money that he may not.
No, you're not making up for it. You
You're
just,
still after that money
you're-
that he didn't pay you too.
We're not deducting from money owed, by extra money.
you're not deducting from what he owed and
So
yeah.
he's being
You're
minded
still
that he
trying to-
owes the money from the previous invoice. He's just coming here to buy more. Like what? I don't
No,
know.
he
What
hasn't
is
come
it?
to buy more. You've just basically, you told him, you originally told him what the price was. And now when you want to now that he hasn't come back with the payment, like you told him it was $10 a widget and he hasn't paid it. Now that the payment date of when you sold him on credit is due, you just want to tack on extra charges on his bill. Just as a way of penalizing him and making more money off of him.
Yeah, like, but the transaction was done already, it's an old transaction, he bought this a month ago, he didn't pay another price, right, but you cannot trade in front because the
It
transaction
something doesn't
was
sound
already
right.
sealed.
by the way.
What?
Doesn't sound right, because if you give a guy an invoice and he doesn't pay in 30 days, and you send another invoice and there's $100
Added on.
difference,
Yeah.
something doesn't
No.
fit. It sounds like.
It doesn't sound
going
kosher.
Forward,
Right.
because we had another question like this, what was a yid? Didn't we have another question that they let it do this to? a
Well,
yid?
the question with the YID, it's a penalty payment that's right there in black and white.
I thought he denied that he owes the money, and he knows that he owed, didn't we have something like that? before?
It could be we did, but penalty fees are permissible if it's on a one-time basis.
Right. This is-
No,
And as long as it's disclosed in advance.
You know, and most people on their businesses have on their invoices that if you don't pay in time, there'll be a 2% a
Right.
month charge.
Right, you're not allowed to do it 2% a month. With a goy you could. With a goy you could, and if it's there in black and white, that if you don't pay on time, you're gonna have an added fees, then that's one thing.
I've never seen it enforced, by the way.
Yeah,
I've never seen that.
Well,
The
it's-
guy pays you 90 instead of 30 days, you don't pay me the extra $100 that you owe me on the interest.
well, because it's not good, it's not a good business
It's not.
model, because the guy won't buy from you in the future.
Mhm.
Okay, right, so. But there might be certain industries where it does work. In other words, in your industry, it's not practical to enforce it, but there
maybe
could
it's a
be other.
one-time deal and it's-
Yeah, anyway, there's a certain deception involved here, and that's really
Okay,
the
that's-
basis of the shiloh.
that helps.
So he says, Tshuva, afsha hagoy lo shilem es hatashlum bizman lechen v'ni. He says, even though the non-Jew did not pay on time when he should have, he's basically saying two wrongs do not make a right. Ein lechen v'ni lahosef bin pikaso al cheshbon ha'akum deyesh kan iser geneva. He says, if you surreptitiously, without notifying him, add on to his bill, you're performing an act of geneva, even though he hasn't paid on time.
Mhm.
Now, obviously, and he's quoting a Shalos Teshuva Sefer Teshuras Chai, He says, "Ha'osa kein yesh biyado iser geneva mamish." You're committing an act of geneva. Shenoto mimenu shelo l'daito, because you're taking extra money from him without his realization that you're charging him more than what he was originally agreed. V'gam asur lahat oso, and you're not allowed to deceive him. So the storekeeper, or the merchant can say, well, if I would have known that he wouldn't pay for another month, I never would have given him this good price. But that doesn't mean that you have a right to deceive him, because the buyer, the non-Jewish buyer could say, if I would have known that you would have tacked on an additional fee, I never would have bought it. And he says, and stealing from an akum is worse than stealing, worse than gezela. Let's see. Okay. All right. Next shaila. Misha ba mamon chaveru liyado birishus kigon halvao pikadon oschar sacher v'cheshetaveuhu kavash hamamon bechozka ve'eno machziro mipnei shehu adam alim v'kasher. Okay, so Ruvain lends Shimon money. Okay, Shimon owes Ruvain money. And Shimon had a right to Ruvain's money at one time, but now Shimon is refusing to pay back the loan because he's a shtarker, and he decides that he's not going to pay back Ruvain what he owes him. Al eze iser over oso adam kishena rotza lachzer mamon chavero. So what is the violation? In other words, it's different. Is it different from Geneva, or is it the same thing as Geneva? Geneva is when I illicitly take something that belongs to you. Here, you willingly gave me the money or the item that you were loaning to me, but now I'm refusing to give it back. Is that also called Geneva or Gezela? So the answer is, and I'm not really sure, this is not really like a practical question, is it mutter or us, or it's just, we want to try and define.
Classify?
Yeah, we want to classify it, or a definition, yeah. Ezehu oshek sha'asra haTorah lo sa'ashok esreacha. So this is, what is the kind of oppression which the Torah commands against when it says, do not oppress your fellow? So this is what the Gemara says, is when you obtain your friend's assets legally with the desire or with the consent of the owner, the kevin shetivauhu kavash hamamon bechozka v'lo achziro. But then when he asks it for you back, asks for it back, you refuse. Kagon shahayalo biad chavero halva or schirus. Let's say I lent money to a friend, or I lent him my lawnmower. V'hu tivao ve'enu yachal lahotzi mimenu mipnei shu olim b'kasha. And then when I ask him for the money or the lawnmower back, I'm not able to get it back because he's a person of strong will, and he can throw his weight around. Kol ha'osa kain over below sa'ashok v'hu bichlal geza. So anyone who does that is clearly in violation of a Torah law.
You're saying kasha, like, you're saying that, just saying outright, I'm not giving it back to you. That's it. There's no other extenuating circumstances.
Yeah, he's a person who doesn't acknowledge that he has an obligation to give it back. I'll give it back when I'm ready.
So it's not like I'm not giving it back, but I'm not ready to give it back.
They seem to be the same to me. He's a type of person who just decides who is a difficult person to deal with, and whereas most people would pay back a loan, this guy says, I'm not ready to pay it back.
Or most people would say, I'm sorry, I just can't do it right now.
Can you extend?
Yeah.
Can you extend it?
Right.
I wouldn't call that a kasha.
Right. You wouldn't call that a starker. Yeah. He actually is brazen and says, I'm not interested in paying you back yet. I'll give it to you when I'm ready.
It's like unwilling versus unable.
Yes,
Right.
yes. Unwilling versus unable.
Yeah, good.
So this is in the category of Gezel. And he's just really quoting the Rambam. And it's a subcategory of Geneva. And this, by the way, is true if regardless of whether the owner of the item or the lender is Jewish or non-Jewish. Okay. But we know this famous halacha. The Shulchan Aruch says that there's no prohibition of lo sa'ashok. Like if a Gentile gives you something and you don't give it back, or you have a debt to a non-Jew, you're not in violation of lo sa'ashok, because the Torah says lo sa'ashok es reacha. Do not oppress your fellow. He's not your fellow. But it says at the same time, v'hu she'en chilul Hashem b'davar.
Right.
But that's provided that there's not going to be a chilul Hashem. Kigon shalava minochri umeis hanochri rashai lachachesh livno she'ena yodea beberer ayin sham. The example that he gives is that if you borrow money from a non-Jew, and then the non-Jew lender dies, and the children aren't sure whether you paid it back, if there's no evidence that you haven't paid it back, you would be allowed to, in some way,
Doesn't sound like very nice.
That's what it sounds like.
Conduct, I love
But it's not proper conduct. Like, absolutely not. Okay. But of course, and then we saw the Be'er Hagola, who said that he's seen many people return things that they weren't obligated to a Gentile, and that he's seen them have bracha, and he's seen a lot of people who stick to the letter of the law, and they have not had bracha. Okay. Okay.
So we're saying that it's good then? Als menschlichkeit of the Torah, like, let's see it.
A person should always go above what the minimal requirements of the Torah are, especially when it comes to interpersonal dealings, especially with non-Jews. Because also, what if you create a chilul Hashem unbeknownst to you? You think to yourself, oh, they'll never find out, but maybe they do know, and maybe their father told them something orally, and you say, oh well, there was never any document signed, so I'm not sure if I still owe them the money or not. Yeah. So, but they're going to hold that against you, and that really is a chilul Hashem. Okay. All right. Next. She'ela ilan hashayach lishcheno umotzi peros l'socha reshus shelo, ela sha'anafiv notim al eim haderech. He says that my neighbor owns a tree that is a fruit-bearing tree, and the branches protrude into my property, and the branches go also on the path between us. Mahadin kishamotze peros shenaflu baderech. What will be the rule or the law when produce falls on the path between us? Let me just get the next document.
Before you go further, is there a difference between a Rishus Yachid and Rishus Rabim, if it fell into the Rishus Rabim versus?
We did,
Yeah. Something like this.
Yeah, we did talk about it before. If the fruit falls into Rishus Rabim,
It's a different story.
then I believe we said it's permissible to take the produce. Okay.
That's dropped, not still on the tree.
No, but if it's hanging over into your property, you see this in Israel all the time, where people have so many fruit trees in their backyard and then there's tonnage. And the tree is shared. It's on your property, but it's hanging, a quarter of it's hanging over into to the neighbors. See, this with all these lemon trees and all types of this kind
So what
of
was
stuff.
the answer on that?
So, well, I think we said before, Rishus Rabim, it's it's completely worth it to take.
Right.
But most
Yeah.
people though will tell you, just help yourself, like on a neighborly, like that we see, that
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
And it's just help yourself, especially if it's hanging into your garden, or, what if it's causing damage? all the fruit making a mess and.
right, right,
Blueberries or whatever it is.
or berries, yeah.
You know, there's
Yeah.
lots of questions that come up.
So what he's basically saying is that there's a pathway between our properties. The produce is falling on the pathway. Ha'im yachol lakachas osam haperos shenaflu. Am I allowed to take the produce that has fallen, o asr mishum gezel? Or maybe there's a gezel problem. D'shema yavo haba'olim la'osfa me'hamakom shenaflu sham, v'adayin lo hisyashu mehem, because maybe the owner will still want to claim them, and hasn't had yeush yet. Okay. So the tshuva is mishamotze peros b'derech tachas anfei ha'ilan shehunota al eim haderech. If a person finds produce that fell onto the road or onto a pathway, im osam peros shedarkon lipol min ha'ilan uvenefilasan heinim asos. So when these produce items fall off the tree on their own, they become dirty or they become mushy. Such as figs or berries. When they fall to the ground, they often get bruised and smushed. Or it could even be produce that does not get damaged when it falls off the tree. But the majority of people who walk by there are not Jewish. Or even if they are Jewish, but so many times animals like squirrels will come and start eating the produce when it falls off the tree. In all of those cases, it's pretty clear from the circumstances that the owner of the tree has relinquished his rights to that produce. Why? Because he knows that as soon as it hits the ground, it's really damaged produce. And it's if he really wanted to retrieve that produce, he would have caused some kind of catch system that would have caught the produce before it hit the ground. And therefore, if you see produce falling off the tree and you want to quickly take it before anyone else does, you have a right to do that. And similarly, when dates are blown off a tree by the wind, you're allowed to take them. Because the owner will have yeyosh. But let's say there's evidence that the owner wants to retrieve that produce. What's the example? Kagon shehi kifo makom ha'ilan geder. Let's say that he puts a fence of some kind around the tree. Okay, even though maybe he's not supposed to do that because it's in a reshus harabim. O shetiknu hamakom shenaflu ad sheyilaktu osan. Or maybe he put down a mat or some kind of tarp on the pathway so that the produce would fall on that. So you're not allowed to take that produce because the owner has revealed that they want to retrieve that produce. But if it just hits the ground, then you're allowed to take that stuff.
Sign.
Or if he puts up a sign, that would be another example, I
So
suppose.
Moshe's example that if the neighbor can give permission, you can't pick out the tree, and that's for sure you can't do.
If the what?
If the branch overhangs the Rishi Yachid or Rabin, you can't just pick out the branches.
Right. It doesn't seem that you'd be allowed to pick the produce. Now,
That's
we,
your permission.
right. We did learn that if someone's branches protrude into your property, you are allowed to trim the branches back without asking permission. I do remember learning that. I don't remember if it was in Rav Shraga's Sefer or in the Imre Yaakov. You don't have to ask permission.
What about the fruit? Do you have to give it to the owner or you can keep that?
Yeah, it's a good question. What if you're trimming back the branches and there's fruit on those branches?
According to this, you cannot.
According to this, you can't until it actually falls off. But I'm not sure whether that's true if the branches that are protruding into my property are a nuisance. I recently saw a clip a guy had a tree on his property that the branches were protruding onto his neighbor's lawn, but it wasn't obstructive in any way. So the neighbor just was one of these,
For those,
one of these kind of jerky personalities. So he takes a chainsaw and saws exactly on his property line all of the branches, and so it made the news because everyone who walked by it saw like it was so perfectly aligned with the property line, and the guy became a laughing stock. Like everyone pointed to him and basically said, like, who does that, right?
I think the law is that you can do that, but then the court of public opinion is that he's a jerk, right?
Right, yeah. Okay, next. Amar lechavero gizoloti vani moichelach. What if a person says to his friend, go ahead, steal from me and I'll be moichel you? Okay, she'ela misham lechavero gizoloti. What if a guy tells a guy, go ahead, you could steal from me. Who knows, maybe he wants to collect the insurance money. That would be a real scam if he tells his brother-in-law, you know what?
set the fire, don't worry about it.
Well, set the fire, or here he says, you can break in. I won't prosecute against you. I'll make sure my cameras are off, and then I can file an insurance claim. That's not the situation. But a guy tells his friend, you can steal from me and I'll be Michael from you. Either way, either go ahead and steal from me, it's fine, or steal from me and I'll later be Michael. Oshish Isser Bedavar. Or is it prohibited? Now, it seems a little absurd, right? If I'm telling you steal from me, it means I'm giving you permission to take whatever you want from me. That's not stealing by definition. Okay. And so does the person who takes the items, is that called stealing? Is he in violation? So the tshuva he gives is Misha Omer Lechaver Gazoloti, Ein Lo Rishut Legozlo, V'Kol Sheken Kish Omer Lo Im Lo Esed Davar Ploni Tuchal Ligzol. So he says you don't have a right to steal from someone even if he gives you permission. And certainly, if let's say a guy says, I'm for sure going to do a favor X for you. And you want to know something? If I don't do that for you, he wants to give him assurance, you could go ahead and steal from anything you want from my garage. Just take anything you want. But he says you could steal it. He uses the language of steal. Shaharei mushpa v'omed meharsinai shelo ligzol. And the reason is because if the Torah prohibits thievery and robbery, you can't say, well, my friend gives me permission. God says, I don't give you permission. So it all depends, I guess, on how it's phrased. And even if the friend says to you, after you steal it, I'll be moichel, then for sure it's going to be usher. So again, there's a certain absurdity to this whole issue. And it's also different, there's the Pischei Tshuva brings this kind of case, and he says it's not analogous to a case where a person says, go ahead and tear my garment, where sometimes Lamisha Amar Likrok Susi, where it says in the Shulchan Aruch, Omer Lechavero Kras Ksusi, Shavoris Kadi al Manasha Ata Potter, Hareze Potter, the Hasam Asa Berishos. Go ahead, break my property, smash my window. If I give you permission to do that and you go ahead and do it, then you are potter from paying me. And it's permissible for you to break an item of mine. And the reason is because I've given you full permission to damage my property. Mikol makom, kevin shelo nishar biyado klum potter. Right? But he says, and the reason why it's okay over there is because the perpetrator is not left with anything that belonged to the owner at the end of the act. The guy says, break or tear my property, fine, and then he walks away. So he's not gaining anything. Aval habigzoloti lo natan lo rishus ela b'toras gazela ugzela chayev b'hashava. But when I tell you, go ahead, you could steal from me. I don't say you could take it. You could steal it from me, right? But then you have an obligation to return it. It's not like the case of damage where there's nothing more for me to do other than payment. Okay, we'll have to look at this a little bit more carefully tomorrow. It's a strange scenario.
Strange.